The big news is in. Maxx Crosby. It's a Baltimore Raven. That looks weird. I was used to Maxx Crosby as a Raider, but especially in recent days and recent hours, it had become very clear that trade talks were heating up, and Baltimore ends up sending two first-round picks to the Las Vegas Raiders for the edge rusher, Maxx Crosby. And I know that a lot of 49ers fans watch me know the 49ers were not able to compete with that trade return package. In summary, the Raiders at the start of this sweepstakes said that they wanted two first-round picks and an impact player. That was the Micah Parsons price tag. We scoffed at that price tag, rightfully so. The Raiders were not able to get that much in return for Maxx Crosby. They were only able to get the two first-round picks, not the impact player. But the Ravens' first-round pick heading to Las Vegas is pick number 14. The 49ers, they had pick number 27 in the first round. Obviously not as strong as pick number 14, so would have been a non-starter for the Las Vegas Raiders to even consider whatever the 49ers might have floated out there. Over half the league approached the Las Vegas Raiders about Maxx Crosby, and that included the 49ers. But obviously, the Baltimore Ravens were able to bring in the strongest trade package, and now a Ravens team that had a bad defense last year is going to have a chance to improve that unit with the star edge rusher in tow. You could take a look at some of the Ravens' talent now on the defensive side of the ball. It includes Kyle Hamilton, the great safety, Roquan Smith at the linebacker level. But in that front seven, if you pair Roquan with Maxx Crosby, I know that the Ravens had aged out defensively over the last couple of years. I know that they didn't rank well. They were down in the bottom 20s this year defensively. They hope that this is something that can revive this unit. The trade cannot be processed until next week, but it is in place. Crosby expected to be a Raven with those 2 ones back to Vegas. Apparently, the Cowboys made a huge push for Maxx Crosby. We heard that from Trey Wingo last night, but ultimately that push fell apart. The Ravens stayed consistent and ultimately got the guy that they call Mad Max. Pick number 14 this year, and then it all depends on how good the Ravens are in this 2026 season. That's going to determine the actual level of compensation in 2027. If the Ravens are very good, well, then it could be a pick down in the 20s or maybe even in the 30s. If the Ravens are not a good team again, the pick can be higher for the Las Vegas Raiders. But it definitely was appealing to the Raiders that the Ravens were offering number 14 this season. The Dallas Cowboys were willing to offer a first-round pick and a second-round pick. So now, like in retrospect, we can see exactly how this played out cost-wise, negotiation-wise, bidding war-wise around the league. And I think that it played out exactly the way that we read it from the outside. The Raiders wanted 2 first-round picks and an impact player. The rest of the league said, no way, that's too much. The Cowboys thought that they were going to get Maxx Crosby last night at the cost of a first-round pick and a second-round pick. But the Ravens kept on pushing, and they ultimately said, all right, 2 ones, one this year, number 14, one next year, depending on where we finish. No impact player. Let's finish the deal before the tampering window and the new league year starts. And ultimately, that price ended up winning out. I would say more than 2/3 of the way to the initial asking price, the Micah Parsons price of 2 first-round picks and an impact player. That was Kenny Clark, who headed over to the Dallas Cowboys. And I find it humorous that the Cowboys were so aggressively trying to get Maxx Crosby the year after they traded away Micah Parsons. We can take a look at the salary cap impact for the Baltimore Ravens. This is what Baltimore is going to inherit in the Maxx Crosby contract. Look, Over the Cap has already gone ahead and put the Ravens logo. And I guess it's easy when you go from the Raiders to the Ravens. Both names start with an R and an A, but the RA logo, the Ravens logo, is already up there for Maxx Crosby on Over the Cap. I can get this ready for you guys right now, and then we can go ahead and put it up onto the screen. All right, here it is. Give me about 5 more seconds. I'm operating with a bunch of different windows open here at Shaver Lake, but we now have a look at the Maxx Crosby contract inherited by the Baltimore Ravens. All right, so we could zoom in a little bit on it right here. 2026, they inherit the base salary of $30 million. That is all guaranteed. I think it's appealing, very appealing for the Ravens. They have team control all the way through 2029. The salaries remain about consistent. This was a very tradable deal for the Las Vegas Raiders because the prorated signing bonus was only about $10 million. So not a whole lot of dead money for the Raiders. They agreed to terms with Maxx Crosby last offseason, I think, with the understanding that he could be traded this offseason, as soon as this offseason. And that did indeed happen. The Raiders are clearing the way for Fernando Mendoza and a new era. Obviously, Tom Brady now part of ownership there. Clint Kubiak is the new coach. Geno Smith is going to be released very shortly. Mendoza out of Indiana is going to be picked. And now there is draft capital, 2 first-round picks heading Las Vegas's way in their effort for a reset. On the Ravens side, they obviously get a really good edge rusher. They have to pay him $30 million this year. They hope that it does work out. If for some reason Maxx Crosby's career continues sliding, and I think that it has declined a bit over the past couple years. He has not been in his statistical prime since about 2022, 2023. If the production continues sliding and the Ravens no longer care to have him around, well, they can try to package him and send him somewhere else, or they can deal with whatever down the road without any guaranteed money beyond 2026. Now, that's something that the Ravens do not want to see happen because they just paid 2 first-round picks for Maxx Crosby. So obviously they believe in the player. They think that if he's put into a new system, one away from the Raiders, which obviously didn't serve Maxx Crosby all too well, the Baltimore Ravens believe that he can succeed. I will say this about Maxx Crosby. He is one of the hardest workers in the NFL. This is somebody who built himself from the ground up. He was a 4th-round pick in the 2019 draft. That was the draft that saw Nick Bosa go at the very top behind Kyler Murray to the 49ers. Well, Crosby went to the Oakland Raiders at number 106 overall, coming out of Eastern Michigan. A lot of people scoffed at Maxx Crosby, including the 49ers' own brass. Max remembers, and the 49ers remember, Kyle Shanahan does, when he was in the hotel room at the NFL Combine visiting with the 49ers people in the quick car wash interview sessions. 49ers talked some crap to Maxx Crosby. They didn't think that he would ever amount to anything. And Kyle Shanahan apologized to him. I mean, a few All-Pros later at the joint practice between the 49ers and the Raiders this past year. It turned into a little bit of a joking matter. But I think that Max saw a lot of those slights over the years, and those fueled him to become not only one of the best edge rushers in the game, but also a guy who truly led his teammates by example with work ethic. And I think that the 49ers admired what they saw work-wise out of Maxx Crosby when they had those joint practices against the Raiders in 2 recent seasons. I think 2023 and 2025 both saw trips from the 49ers to go see Maxx Crosby and the Raiders in Las Vegas. And, you know, amidst a sea of disorganization in the Raiders building, and I was in that building twice in Las Vegas and multiple times before that, when Maxx Crosby was already around in Alameda, when they were still the Oakland Raiders. Amidst the sea of disorganization, I can say that Maxx Crosby was always a pillar of how to do things right, how to work hard. And he was a true technician for the Raiders in terms of edge rushing presence and just doing the small things right. And I think it's a big loss for the Raiders building. I understand why they wanted to hit the reset button as Crosby is getting up toward 30 years of age. This is going to be the age 29 season for Maxx Crosby. And obviously the Raiders are moving on to a very young quarterback, fresh out of college with a new coaching regime. And they were able to hold back and get the premium draft capital that they wanted in return. But this is the type of player that you do want in your building, which is why Baltimore was willing to fork over those 2 first-round picks. Now, The production part of this, which I do believe that there has been a little bit of a concerning drop for Maxx Crosby in terms of the sack numbers, in terms of the pressure numbers. It's definitely something that is worth investigating. And the reason that I brought it up so many times over the course of this trade saga is because you didn't see that type of production drop off for Micah Parsons leading up to his trade from the Dallas Cowboys to the Green Bay Packers. And that's why Micah went for 2-1s and a premium player in the defensive tackle, Kenny Clark. But if you look at Maxx Crosby's production, he had 108 pressures in 2021. That was a career high. That was also his career high pass rushing grade. His highest sack totals came in 2022 and 2023, but his highest pressure total came in 2021 with 108. He went down to 81 pressures in 2022, down to 94, back up to 94 pressures, but down from 108 pressures in 2023. So 108, 81, 94 in the pressure column. Then in 2024, Crosby's snap count diminished to 766 from 1,080, and his pressure count dropped meteorically down to 54. 54 and 8 sacks. And then in 2025, 53 and 10 sacks. The snap counts in both seasons under 1,000, and both seasons ended needing surgery for Maxx Crosby. So the peak numbers actually came about 3 to 5 years ago for Maxx Crosby, which was my big concern looking at some of the potential trades for him. And I just got done showering Maxx Crosby with a lot of praise for a few minutes, talking about the big positives that he's going to bring the Baltimore Ravens. But the reason that it took a while to get to this compensation, it took a while, and it was only one team, it looks like, was willing to send those 2 first-round picks over, Baltimore. The reason it took a while is because the production has diminished for Maxx Crosby over the course of the past couple of seasons. It's not like Micah Parsons, where the production was at an all-time peak and had stayed at an all-time peak for several seasons when the Green Bay Packers traded for him. And even that trade for the Packers came with a risk and a potential downside. And you saw it happen in real life last year. Green Bay saw Micah Parsons tear his ACL. Then they didn't have a pass rush because they didn't have any other resources to spend, and they had already lost Kenny Clark because he was part of that trade to Dallas. So when you invest this type of capital in a player, you are taking a big, big risk. You need him to stay healthy. Crosby has finished the past 2 seasons hurt. So Baltimore, with a languishing defense, definitely hopes that this can reinfuse that side of the ball. We now see why Lamar Jackson tweeted what he did tweet earlier today. I forgot if he tweeted the eyeball emojis or something. I mean, he definitely hinted that something big was coming. Mike and I were texting about it throughout the course of the day. We speculated maybe a contract extension for Lamar, maybe something else. It turned out that it was a trade for Maxx Crosby to the Baltimore Ravens. And again, 2 first-round picks. The only team in the league that was willing to trade 2 first-round picks for Maxx Crosby were the Baltimore Ravens. The Cowboys were willing to trade a 1 and a 2. The Ravens were willing to trade 2 1s. Just by virtue of where the Ravens were scheduled to pick in the first round because of their record last year, they were not a good team. They missed out on the playoffs. Just by virtue of that, the Ravens' first-round pick was more valuable than, say, the first-round pick of a team like the 49ers. Number 14 versus number 27. That made the Ravens one of the leaders in the sweepstakes and the ultimate winner of this sweepstakes. Crosby had reportedly been eyeing the Cowboys, Ravens, and Patriots for weeks. The Cowboys seem to be dead set on spending in this offseason. The Ravens obviously will be spending now that they've inherited the Maxx Crosby contract. And I think that the Patriots are going to be throwing some bags at people over the course of the next week, trying to take that next step after they felt that they were ahead of schedule making the Super Bowl in the 2025 season. So it's fascinating stuff. I mean, this is a big time trade. Over half the league was interested in Maxx Crosby, as they should have been. But the teams that I just mentioned, and especially the Baltimore Ravens and the Dallas Cowboys were the ones that were willing to up this compensation to very serious levels, to very risky levels. And that is why we now see Maxx Crosby ready to don that Baltimore Ravens uniform, moving from Raider silver and black to the Baltimore Ravens purple. We saw this from a little bit earlier today. I still have some of the tweets open from the show that we did this morning, talking about the interest that we had gauged last night, and I want to pop some of them open on the screen. The problem is I can only do that when I close enough windows here. I've got so much stuff open. I just flew across country, settled in here to Shaver Lake. Mike starts calling me. Anytime that the phone lights up that Mike is calling you, you know that there is big news. Mike normally texts, but if Mike calls, well, then something serious is happening. And this is what happened. This was finally found it. This is what we had this morning. Maxx Crosby is drawing serious interest around the league. The Dallas Cowboys are closely monitoring the situation and remain very interested, while the Baltimore Ravens are also a team to watch. Diana was right about that. GMs believe the Raiders are willing to work on a deal. They indeed were, and it comes at the cost of those 2 first-round picks. So that's the Ravens' potential 2026 defense. Now, again, really, really worth mentioning that the Ravens were not good defensively last year. I could even find the team tier chart here for defense, and we could see just how bad the Ravens were. But they couldn't stop a nosebleed for a lot of the season. Total EPA for the Baltimore defense by the end of it was number 18. But there were some real struggles for the Ravens, who we see on this chart that I can toss open and make cover the entire screen. We can see the Ravens as right here. I'm going to circle them with my cursor. You can see them on the x-axis as a below average pass defense, to the left of the dividing line right here, a below average pass defense and an above average run defense, actually in the same vicinity as the Raiders, ironically. So the Ravens feel that they need more of a pass rush. Obviously, whenever you try to pick up Maxx Crosby, that is the goal, pass rush. And they hope that this vaults them back into the area of defensive respectability, which is the top right of this chart. Look where the Seattle Seahawks are. You know, if you're the 49ers, obviously you couldn't have afforded Maxx Crosby at the price that he ended up going for. But I would say that you can breathe a sigh of relief that he didn't go to the Rams or the Seattle Seahawks. And, you know, by extension, the Rams and the Seahawks didn't really have the trade capital to be competitive in a Maxx Crosby sweepstakes, because the NFC West was the best division that we had ever seen in the history of the game. And that meant that all 3 teams at the top of the NFC West, Seattle, LA, San Francisco, all 3 of those teams finished with picks in either the low 20s or the 30s this year, right? And the Seahawks were down at number 32. So when you have such relatively weak first-round draft picks and the sweepstakes for a player enters the first-round pick territory, you're going to be at a fundamental disadvantage just because the Ravens have pick number 14 and the NFC West was headlined by the 49ers at pick number 27. The 49ers, the Rams, and the Seahawks were all interested in trading for Maxx Crosby. Why wouldn't they be? But only at a certain price, and obviously only the price that they could afford. And neither of those 3 teams could afford Maxx Crosby, and that is why he's now going to be headed to the Baltimore Ravens. Now, this trade cannot be finalized until the start of the new league year. So expect this to be finalized on March 11th. We can get the official press release at that time from the Ravens, maybe even one from the Raiders. Maxx Crosby had a great affinity for Raiders fans. I think that's why he kept his desire to be traded relatively quiet. He didn't come out with a formal trade request. He didn't want to burn too many bridges on the way out, but I think it ultimately made a lot of business sense for the Raiders to move on from him, even though he would have been a very, very nice example to keep in that building. A hell of a career for Maxx Crosby in the silver and black, and now it's going to move over to the AFC North. I'm going to open this up for a few minutes of questions, see what you guys are saying on this beautiful Friday evening. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but I'm sure a lot of people in the comment section do. The 49ers were not going to be able to win the sweepstakes for Maxx Crosby given the price that he ended up going for. I don't think that this is rocket science. Some might be confused about this, but you shouldn't be. The Ravens had the number 14 overall pick, and they sent 2 first-rounders. The 49ers just did not have that draft capital. It just was not mathematically possible. Trey Hendrickson is still available, and guess what? The 49ers would not have to trade for Trey Hendrickson. Think about this. The Cincinnati Bengals, before the trade deadline, wanted a first-round pick in exchange for half a season of Trey Hendrickson. And then whomever would have traded for him would have had to give him a contract extension. There was nobody dumb enough to trade for Trey Hendrickson for a first-round pick, especially since he was hurt at the time. It's a good thing the 49ers didn't make that move. Trey did not get franchise tagged the second time by the Bengals, which means that he is now scheduled to become a free agent. So now the team that Trey Hendrickson signs with is not going to have to forego any draft capital. And he potentially is still out there. And I would put Trey Hendrickson in a similar boat as Maxx Crosby. He actually led the league in sacks just 2 years ago. Trey Hendrickson, this past season, he saw some injuries. He's obviously getting a little bit older, but I don't think that he's an aging player quite yet. And I would think that he's going to be motivated at his next stop. And you could probably expect some solid football from Trey Hendrickson. And guess what? You can acquire him without trading away first-round picks. We always said that Maxx Crosby at the right price would be something that the 49ers could be seriously involved in. The Raiders ended up holding out for an extremely high price, and Maxx Crosby went for that price, and the 49ers were very clearly no longer in a serious mix just because they didn't have the ammo to make that kind of trade. For Trey Hendrickson, things might be different. This is going to be more of a monetary war for Trey Hendrickson. It's not going to be a draft capital war. And of course, there are other edge rushers also available, but I think that Hendrickson is the one that is most jumping out at people. I've got a lot of questions. Should the 49ers sign Trey Hendrickson? Is one of them? It depends on the price. Yeah, I mean, I could say they should sign every free agent at a certain price, but we'll see what the open market says. Perhaps he'll be slightly undervalued because of the core muscle surgery, because he didn't play all that much for the Bengals last year. Typically, though, you have to be ready to overpay in free agency. The 49ers did finish dead last in 2025 with only 20 sacks. So that is also worth noting. The Cowboys will probably turn to Trey Hendrickson, so it might turn into a price war. And the Dallas Cowboys are probably going to be willing to spend this offseason. And you know what? Like, typically, say that does materialize. Say that the 49ers do target Trey Hendrickson. Say that the Cowboys target him as well. So that the Cowboys are willing to pay an exorbitant amount, over $40 million a year for Trey Hendrickson. The 49ers are smart to tap out of it. 49ers fans, I'm sure there's going to be a subset that's disappointed, but it is generally a wise move, and it has been for about 30 years, to not emulate Jerry Jones. If you are divergent from what Jerry Jones has been doing, you're typically on the right track in this league. Jerry's going to do something this free agency to make sure that the Cowboys stay in the headlines, to make sure that the Cowboys stay relevant. And it might be an overspend. It might be some kind of trade. He kept them in the headlines with the Micah Parsons trade, even though he made his team weaker, definitely in the short run last season, right before the 2025 season kicked off. What Jerry does is often built for social media clicks and built for attention, and is not necessarily directed at making the football team better on the field. And Jerry Jones admits that much. He talks about wanting to keep the Cowboys as relevant as possible at large costs. So if the 49ers get in a bidding war with Dallas for Trey Hendrickson, there's a good chance they lose, and there's a good chance that might be a good thing for football reasons for the 49ers. There's a reason why the draft and shrewd trades are the best way to build up a football team, because The free agent market has got a lot of players with wild hairs up their nose, right? He's got a lot of players like Jerry Jones who are willing to drive up prices to a level that might force you to head into the unsustainable zone from a football standpoint. Yes, it is called the salary cap. I think it's absolutely. I know the 49ers locker room loves Trey Hendrickson. I just don't know what the price is going to be. I don't know how involved the Cowboys and other teams are going to be. This is the fun of next week. We get to sit back and see these guys sign with different teams. We get to sit back and maybe see some trades, get to see some reworked contracts. There's obviously some contractual business that the 49ers are working on with Trent Williams right now that's awaiting resolution. There's a lot that remains unwritten heading into one of the more exciting NFL weeks of the year. The 49ers lost absolutely nothing. I don't know what you're talking about, Richard. They didn't even have the draft capital to be in the final conversation with the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, some of you just really, really need a basic math course, like lower than algebra. 14, number 14 in the draft order is more valuable than number 27. If a team is able and willing to trade number 14 away, that's going to beat out any offer that includes number 27. So even if the 49ers were willing to trade a first-round pick, even if they were willing to extend themselves to get Maxx Crosby, they would not have been able to beat the Ravens' offer. The only team that even came close to the Ravens' offer was the Dallas Cowboys with a first-round and a second-round pick offered to the Baltimore Ravens. So I just think that it would be very good for everybody's mental health to sit back and realize that not every trade can go your team's way. Not every trade is a win or a loss for your team. It's simply the marketplace of football players. Some become available, some don't. Some will head to your team, some won't. The market makes sense for a certain player. The market doesn't make sense for others. And in this case, the market just didn't add up for the 49ers, and I think it was clear to see from a mile away. We talked about Maxx Crosby as a possibility back when it seemed that the Raiders' price of 2 first-round picks and an impact player was an absolute joke, and that proved to be a stretch, but that's how you negotiate. You set a higher price, then the other party comes in with a lower price, and then you find a good halfway point in the middle, or a point in the middle that both parties are acceptable to, amenable to, and the Ravens and the Raiders obviously thought that this was fair. It was something that probably wouldn't have worked between the Raiders and any other team in the NFL. What was the price they paid? A first-round pick in 2026, number 14, and a first-round pick in 2027, whatever that ends up being in 2027, depending on their record. The math didn't math. You know, one of our smartest viewers is Eric Gomes. He's able to say what I say, except in like 10% of the words, which means that he's got a higher IQ, which means he's able to really make things more concise. I should have just said the math didn't math, which is a very good summary from Eric. Mike said that for the 49ers to even be competitive in this Maxx Crosby war, they probably would have had to offer 2 firsts and 2 seconds. No, thank you. Again, for a player entering age 29 who has been on the decline in terms of pressures generated per year ever since 2021, it's been a while since he generated his highest output of his career, who's ended the past 2 seasons with surgeries. I could say a lot of good stuff about Maxx Crosby, and I did over the course of this show. But I can also say that that's somebody that wouldn't be worth 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. Point blank. There's no way. Like it just the fact of the matter. Now the question is he worth 2 first-round picks? That's what the Ravens think that he's worth. They were the only team that thought that in the entire National Football League. Maybe they're going to be right, but they definitely extended themselves to make the offer that the Las Vegas Raiders ultimately accepted. Question from Chico State 14. Question for Dave. Don't the 49ers have to roll all their cap space over into next year so they really can't do anything in free agency this year? No, not really. They have to roll a lot over. You're correct about that. They have to save room this season to have room for escalating costs in the future, but it doesn't preclude them from taking on free agency this year. They had $26 million free up when the Brandon Ayuk guarantees were voided. And Brandon Ayuk won't be on this team. They'll even be able to open up some 2026 room after they release him. That's probably happening in a few days on March 11th. Other housekeeping can open up some more space for the 49ers. They have to think about this in a big picture outlook, yes. But they are not at an impasse where they can't spend money. Are they going to be the bigger spenders in free agency? No, I don't think so. It's all a calculation, and it's a little bit of guess and check because you don't know exactly how high the cap is going to be in future years. So it's not a, firm number that everybody knows the 49ers have to stay under. They have to play it by feel. They have to run it through some predictive models. And they definitely restrained themselves in free agency last year, but they also spent a lot on their own guys with all the new deals, the redos of Fred Warner and George Kittle, and obviously the new deal for Brock Purdy. So they were still top 5 in spending. They still set a franchise record for spending last offseason. That's put them in a position to where, no, they're not going to be crazy spenders in free agency on a year-in, year-out basis. But if they do see an opportunity, yes, they can put the pedal to the metal, at least for an abbreviated portion of time. So you have to carry over some space, obviously, but you don't have to carry over every single cent of salary cap space that you have right now. Do I see Crosby staying with the Ravens long term? They have a new coaching staff. Yes, they do. And they're planning on making some big moves. But Money Max says, I just don't see this working out. Well, I mean, a lot of things can happen. It's the NFL. Maxx Crosby can continue getting hurt like he has the past couple of years. And that could lead to this being a shorter relationship than the Ravens want. Maxx Crosby can also find a fountain of youth. You never know. Change of scenery, moves away from the Raiders, and this deal, they've have him under contract for several seasons, could really work out for the Ravens. It is hard to be good in the NFL for a year. It's hard to be good at all in the NFL, right? It is even harder to sustain excellence past the age of 30. I think that Maxx Crosby is wired the right way to be able to do it, but will his body cooperate? I don't know. I think that he's a guy that's going to maximize his chances to be good. Does that mean that he's going to be really good for a long time for sure, to where the Ravens are going to want to keep him throughout the entirety of his contract? No, it doesn't guarantee anything. In fact, I can't even guarantee that we'll be alive by Sunday this weekend. That's a Kyle Shanahan joke, but it's one of those things where we'll see. You play the probabilities. The Raiders probably feel that they made out like bandits here, made out like Raiders here with 2 first-round picks. They held firm, and they got their 2 ones. They didn't have to wait any longer. They weren't going to say, okay, send an impact player as well. They knew the market. They knew that 2 ones was going to be the limit. They got that from the Ravens. They probably feel damn good about that. The Ravens probably feel good about improving their defense with Maxx Crosby. Whoever wins this trade, well, let's check back in a year, 2, maybe 3 years, and we'll know exactly who's won it. But when the Kansas City Chiefs gave up Tyreek Hill for a big haul to the Miami Dolphins, people thought that the Chiefs were out of their minds. Turns out that the Chiefs won that trade. The other day, everybody thought that the Chiefs were out of their minds again. They thought that the Rams won the trade for Trent McDuffie. A lot of draft capital went Kansas City's way. There's a decent chance that Kansas City ends up winning that trade. We just have to wait and see. But at the price that was paid today for Maxx Crosby, the 49ers just that they would not have been able to net Maxx Crosby. They have to turn their focus forward. Trey Hendrickson, possibility. Free agent possibility. Jonathan Grenard, there's a trade possibility. The draft is going to be out there as well. You set the table for the draft with free agency. Maxx Crosby is now a Baltimore Raven. At long last, we have seen the conclusion of this trade saga. More good stuff coming up. Hit that subscribe button. We'll talk to you very soon.